Hello, my name is Joanna Frączek-Broda, and I will be your guide on the path to Polish culture. This film would not have been made without the University of Lodz and the NAWA, National Agency for Academic Exchange, and thanks to the Welcome to Poland project, it was possible to make it. I invite you to a movie. In the film, we will focus primarily on information about Polish culture, intercultural communication, and cooperation with Poles. My name is Joanna Frączek-Broda, and I am a doctor of social sciences, and I mainly deal with cultural and generational diversity. I also run the Vagabunda podcast in Polish language about intergenerational diversity. If you want to learn more about me, check out my Facebook, LinkedIn, or my website. The official name of Poland is the Republic of Poland, Rzeczypospolita Polska, and the name Rzeczypospolita or Republic does not mean something ordinary. Rzeczpospolita means a common thing, our shared thing from Latin. As you can see, Poland is the 69th country in the world in terms of area. In the European Union, it is in 9th place in terms of area. It is much smaller than India or Ukraine. It is smaller than Germany and slightly smaller than Japan. The capital, Warsaw or Warszawa in Polish, was founded in the 13th century and it acquired city rights in 1323, and its area is 517,000 square kilometers, and the area of entire agglomeration is much bigger. Warsaw, as you can see, has almost 1,800,000 inhabitants, and the entire Warsaw's agglomeration has over 3,200,000 inhabitants. But I think that since you are associated with the University of Lodz, you are more interested in Łódź. If you want to say the word Łódź correctly, think about the word wool. The first two letters of Łódź come from the wool. Only the last one may cause you some problems. The letter G sounds a bit like a J in joy, but say it more gently, more delicately, as if you had a lisp. G. G, not J. So we have Łódź. Łódź was founded in the 14th century, exactly 100 years after Warsaw. It received city rights and its area is 293,000 square kilometers. The population has been decreasing in recent years and currently it is 655,000 people, while the entire agglomeration has over 1 million people. Returning to Poland as a country, Poland's population is over 38 million, so it is the 38th most populous country in the world. Of course, it is not comparable to, for example, India, but it is not the smallest country in Europe. What is also very important, Polish society consists of 97% of Poles, and only 3% of Poland inhabitants are people from abroad. Mostly they arrived from Ukraine, Belarus, Russia, India, Nepal, and Vietnam. This means that Poland is one of the most homogeneous countries in the world and has no contemporary history of significant intercultural experience. Poland is still learning how to run a diverse society. Although before Second World War, interculturalism was a standard in Poland. As you can see, the population density in Poland is not particularly high. It is much lower than in India, than in Germany or Japan, although higher than in Ukraine or the United States. This has long-term consequences for culture. First of all, Poles are not as accustomed as people living in other countries with a high density of people to a crowd, to entering each other's space, to noise, to talking loudly in public spaces, and these are behaviors that greatly irritate them. But at the same time, they do not have such an exclusive approach to land and property as some residents of the United States, because after all, they live in quite densely populated areas. Gross domestic revenue per capita, per head, is also relatively high. It is much higher than in India or Ukraine, Greece, and many other European countries even. But it is definitely lower than revenues in United States and Japan or Germany. Poland has jumped from the group of extremely poor European countries to the group of moderately wealthy countries and has an appetite for so much more. In terms of geography, generally, rivers cross Poland vertically from south to north, while the main geographical systems such as plains and mountains cross Poland horizontally. Two largest rivers in Poland are the Vistula, Wisła, and the other, Odra. The highest mountains are the Sudets and the Carpathians, and in the center of them there are Tatra mountains with the highest mountain in Poland, Rysy. Maybe try to stay away from the highest peaks on free weekends and on days when most Poles do not work, because the crowds on the trails may exceed your imagination. As for the climate, it is moderate and transitional. It differs in the north and south, and in the north it is generally oceanic, quite changeable, with strong winds. It is colder. In the south, on the other hand, hot weather is much more frequent. It is generally warmer. There are often strong winds, but not as cold as in the north. When coming from warm countries, you must remember that the weather in Poland can be very changeable, unpredictable, and even in the middle of summer, between 3 days of heat, there may be a day when temperature does not exceed 15 degrees Celsius, of course, and it will rain and it will be cold therefore. So, during your trips, be prepared to changing weather conditions. Prepare warmer clothes, and in winter, remember about tire chains if you go to the mountains. For people coming from warm countries, Poland can be depressing and sad, especially in winter. So take care of your mental health by exercises, taking dietary supplements, especially vitamin D and vitamin C, because if you eat in a way that is traditional for your country, it might turn out that after a year or two in Poland, your health may deteriorate significantly and you may develop anemia or even scurvy. On the plains, the weather is much more predictable, so if you go to the mountains, remember that the sudden accumulation of clouds can herald a storm within 5 to 10 minutes, and it can be dangerous. There have been several fatal accidents in Poland where many people died as a result of staying on mountain peaks during a storm. There are plenty of interesting guides showing foreigners what is worth visiting in Poland, and apart from larger cities, old cities, it is definitely worth visiting national parks in the mountains, Mazuria, and the coast. Poland is divided into 16 voivodeships, which are something like provinces or states. Each of them has its own local small government, and each of them has its own voivode. And it is he or she who decides on many matters related to the management of the voivodeship. Łódzkie voivodeship is located in the very center of Poland, and it is crossed by many of the most important Polish transport routes. Now a moment about holidays and days off from work. In general, in Poland, most people work from Monday to Friday, from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. or from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Most office workers do not work on Sundays or Saturdays. And please remember about timing that in Poland we use 24-hour system. So 5 p.m. is 17 and 4 p.m. is 16. In many countries you know this as military time. There are many holidays in Polish calendar during which you do not work during the week, and if such holiday falls on a Thursday, many Poles decide to use a paid day off on Friday, and at this point you will not be able to do anything at the office, at the university, or even service points, because employees take leave the day between Thursday and Saturday, extending their week to 4 days. There is one long weekend in Polish calendar. It is the weekend associated with the celebration of May the 1st and May the 3rd. May the 1st is a Labor Day. May the 3rd is a day of adopting the 3rd May Constitution. And in such a situation, if the first one falls on Tuesday and the third one falls on Thursday, many Poles decide to take 3 days off with paid leave, and thanks to that, they have a 9-day rest from work. Similar situation may happen around Christmas. So check your calendar very carefully if you want to do anything official. When it comes to work rules, generally speaking, in the case of women, they work between 18 and 60 years of age, and in the case of men, between 18 and 65 years of age. You can work in Poland from the age of 15, but there are so many restrictions that it is extremely difficult to employ such an employee, even if he or she is extremely willing to work. You work 40 hours a week, and if you have any overtime, your employer must pay you for it or give you back your time. In Poland, you are entitled to paid leave every year. At the beginning, it is only 20 days a year. If you have less than 10 years of experience, then it's 26 days a year if you have more than 10 years of experience. But it is not necessarily professional experience because, for example, university studies count as 7 years of professional experience. So after graduating and working for 3 years, you have the right to the full leave. You can also go on maternity leave. It is 20 weeks in the case of birth of one child, 31 weeks after the birth of twins, 33 weeks after the birth of triplets. If you work, your employer must also pay your health insurance, and most medical care in the country is free. The law also protects you against exploitation, abuse, sexual exploitation, and mobbing. If such a situation occurs, you have the right to contact the National Labor Inspectorate, PIP, Państwowy Inspektorat Pracy, which must investigate and answer the questions whether mobbing, discrimination, or exploitation happened. If this happens to be true, the case will be referred to court. And now a moment about safety. I know that Poland is not associated with super safetiness. Meanwhile, crime statistics, especially kept by European Union, show that Poland is a very safe country, also compared to countries such as Germany, France, Italy, or the United States. In Poland, fatal beatings, rapes, and extortions are much less common. There are also no terrorist attacks or mass shootings. Generally, because citizens cannot own weapons, access to weapons is much more difficult. It is possible, but after passing complex psychological tests, and the vast majority of citizens do not have access to firearms. Serious crimes against foreigners are rare, although they do occur and are most often racially motivated. Minor crimes such as pickpocketing or robberies do occur, as in any other country in Europe, so you should definitely be careful, especially on trains, on buses and public transport. You should be careful also about the nightlife. Bar fights, passing rape pills, or stealing in bars happen relatively often. Also be aware of unlicensed taxis such as Uber, Lyft and Bolt, as there have been reports of rape of drunk passenger women in the past. Probably you should also stay away from go-go clubs because in the past there have been reports of clients getting drunk and then robbed from all their savings from their credit cards. What you definitely need to watch out for all demonstrations, marches, football fan reviews after football matches when testosterone is flying in the air, because it happens that during these demonstrations or marches, some nationalists emerge onto the street, and since these groups are often racially motivated, it might happen that a person with a different skin color may become a target. Also, be careful with adventure tourists because Poland is not a country where there are warnings everywhere. If there is a cliff in front of you, there will probably not be a sign in Poland telling you not to lean out in this place, or that you should not climb a cliff that consists only of sand, because Poles assume that you have your own mind and you can use it. Therefore, you should not be warned about obvious things. For example, in Poland, a great surprise was caused by the warning on hot tea cups in a famous fast food restaurant that said that the content is hot. For Poles, this is hilarious because it should be obvious. What you definitely need to watch out for is road safety. Unfortunately, Poles are known for road rage and that it is very easy for people to get into fights even fist fights on the road. There is also an unwritten rule that a person who has a larger, more expensive car can basically more than a person who has a weaker, cheaper car. Of course, this does not apply to the police, who will treat both drivers equally. But there are some drivers who believe that the road belongs to them, so be careful. Another thing is medicine. In many countries, much smaller doses of medicines are used than in the case of Poland. Poland is one of the most medicalized countries in the world, and Poles take almost the most over-the-counter painkillers in the world. And in many situations, if you come from a country where weaker drugs are available, the Polish dose of the drug may be simply dangerous for you, just like the Polish anesthesia, which can be given in too high dose. If you receive an antibiotic from a doctor, try to take half of the drug first, and if nothing happens to you, if you do not feel any side effects after half an hour or maybe an hour, you can take the next half of the medicine. But watch your body carefully, because Polish doctors are not always aware of this rule. I will talk about food and drinks later, but for now, remember that in many situations, if you come from a country that is much sunnier and warmer, where you can get more vitamin D naturally, it may turn out that your traditional cuisine may be not good enough for this climate. If you want to stick to your cuisine in Poland, it may not provide you with enough amount of nutrients and vitamins, and it may be worth considering eating more local food or taking supplements, especially vitamin C and vitamin D. Also, watch out for ATM frauds. They can happen especially at night near nightclubs. Remember to see if anybody is standing close behind you and to see if there are any stickers or strange devices attached to the ATM. Also be careful about cybercrime, because it may occur in Poland, especially due to the proximity of countries that use cybercrime as an international management policy. Therefore, do not use open Wi-Fi networks, especially when connecting to a bank or shopping platforms. And now let's move directly to the do's and don'ts recommendation for Polish culture. You must remember that intercultural communication happens when a person from one culture communicates with a person from another culture. This means that if you have been in Poland for 20 years and you have already blended into society, you are probably not communicating at the intercultural communication level, but interpersonal communication level. Intercultural communication participants may be susceptible to cultural blindness. And cultural blindness is a phenomenon that says that we do not fully see what is happening around us because we impose an overlay of our culture on everything, or we try to understand everything through our culture, through our cultural perspective. We also have the attribution errors. You can see them when watching illusions that make one person see one thing and the other person sees the other thing. Exactly the same thing is happening during intercultural communication. One person may see some behaviors as greed. For example, people from South Asia often do not open gifts right after receiving it, only when the person who gave the gift has already left the house, so as not to seem greedy. And Poles, Germans, and Americans tend to open gifts right away to show that they value the gift. Greed for one culture may be sympathy and appreciation for other culture. We may also be victims of lack of certain knowledge in the sense of humor, history, and language, when it turns out that, for example, we do not realize that our knowledge does not necessarily have to coincide with other people's knowledge. For example, for a student from Europe, it is obvious that there are 7 continents, while for a student from South America, there may be 5 continents, and we can therefore mutually assume that the other person is not particularly intelligent and educated to recognize even the numbers of continents. Meanwhile, in our different system of education, we just learn different things. But remember, we can have some joy in discovering these differences. We have also some problems with translation. If we all use English, we assume that we all use it in the same way, not realizing that we still speak in the same way as in our culture. We only translate words, we do not translate culture, we do not translate behaviors, we do not translate intentions and the context that we hide inside our language. And for this reason, very often some nations, for example Poles, are considered uncultured and rude because they express their opinion directly, as it is done every day in Polish language, not taking into account the fact that in the case of British culture, much more often negative feedback is expressed in a much softened way. However, if in an intercultural environment you communicate in a language that is not your national language, or you communicate with people who use your language but not as their first language, remember that you always have the right to ask them to slow down, repeat or paraphrase what they are saying. You have learned foreign language. You put in the effort to learn a foreign language in order to communicate. So asking to speak slower or clearer is nothing more than asking this person to put in 1% of the effort you put into learning that language. There are certain golden rules of intercultural verbal communication. First of all, remember to address your statement clearly. Not in every culture we show the addressee with our whole hand. As in Poland, not in every culture we show with our finger. In many cultures we show addressee with our eyes and even with our mouth. And for many people it is not so obvious who you are talking to at this moment, especially if we misspell the name or we do not know the name of the person we are talking to yet. It is also very important to avoid speaking using metaphors, because metaphors are legible only in the culture in which they were created. And in many situations, we absolutely do not understand what a given phrase means. So it is better to avoid metaphors at all or explain them straight away. It is also good to avoid judging. It is worth focusing on informing, and it is worth practicing this thoroughly. Let's also avoid talking about things that are not directly concerning us or are not within our scope of responsibility. This is especially important for colleagues or students who came from collectivist culture. Collectivistic culture, if you, as a part of the family, as a part of the office, as a part of the team, you promise something, it is as if the whole family, the whole team promised something. And therefore, in the case of Polish universities, Poles very often do not understand that if they promised something or say it will probably happen, this promise applies to the entire office. Therefore, it would be very good to avoid informing in this way, because if you come from individualist culture, you may have a problem if you say, well, I think Olo can do this. Because according to a person from collectivist culture, you have just promised that Olo would do it and you will be able to make sure that Olo does it. And the last point from this part. It is important to suggest the simplest solution for the situation or the simplest behaviors that you recommend. It is important that these behaviors and solutions are true. It happens very often, especially in countries with a high degree of risk avoidance, and Poland is that kind of country. It happens that we do not say directly how we solve a problem because it is inconsistent with, for example, instructions, even though we do this anyway. In the case of greetings in Poland, it is worth remembering that Polish society is divided into two parts. The older part of the population is often very traditional, while the younger part considers itself part of the world, part of the modern European Union. So remember to establish the rules of communication at the beginning with a person and rather use the rule of thumb. So it is better to be a person who is a bit too stiff and too formal than too informal. You have always the time to start behaving informal, and you cannot make the second time the first impression. At the beginning, use the titles and phrases such as Panie doktorze, Pani doktor. professor, doctor. Do not use ordinary greetings and colloquial expressions until someone tells you to use his name, like Joanna. That is the sign that you can relax a little bit and communicate less formally. Remember that shaking hands when greeting and saying goodbye is a standard, but do not kiss women's hand. It is an outdated and sexist custom. If a woman does not extend her hand to you, do not force her to do so, because not all women in Poland will want to greet somebody with a handshake, although for the younger generation it is already a standard. While greeting, Poles basically hug only close friends, both men and women. If you greet your friend, especially in a semi-private and private situation, it is possible that kisses will be exchanged. But these kisses are not kisses on the cheek, but in the air next to the cheek. We start by kissing the air next to the right cheek of the person who we are greeting, and then next to the air next to the left cheek. In some places of the country, it can be only one kiss or even 3 kisses, but don't worry, it's a problem for Poles also, and there's usually a lot of laughter because of this. You can repeat the same behavior when saying goodbye. If you have been invited to someone's home, remember that you may show up empty-handed, but much nicer and culture will be coming with a small, inexpensive gift. It can be sweets, snacks, flowers, or a small gift from your country or alcohol, but remember to ask if the person drinks alcohol. If you want to give a host flowers, remember that chrysanthemums and callas are used in Poland during funerals, so you should probably avoid them. Roses, especially red roses, are mostly reserved for romantic relations, so choose other flowers or bouquet with roses mixed with other flowers. You can also buy cut flowers or flowers in the pot. If you want to give the host delicacies or sweets from your country, remember that Poles love to test various unknown flavors. But it may happen that if they do not like the delicacy or sweets, they can tell you about it directly without paying attention to your emotions. When you enter a private house, remember to ask if you need to take your shoes off, and you take your shoes off in the hall. Please do not come in shoes that may damage the floor, for example, high-heeled shoes or shoes covered with metal. Sometimes you are given flip-flops. You can use them or you can go barefoot. And you can tell without any problem the host that you would like to go barefoot. No one will give you side looks, although especially older women may complain that you are going to catch a cold. In Poland, such complaining is perceived as caring for the guest or caring for a friend or family member. Generally, Poles love to complain. So if you hear surprising words from Polish colleagues when they complain about absolutely everything, from the weather, government to other Poles, do not perceive it as real information, but rather as a tendency to complain. Complaining is Poland's national sport. Such complaining does not mean, however, that it is a request for help. Most often, it is a need to vent some dissatisfaction, and if you try to propose a real solution, the Pole may feel offended that you considered him incapable of coming up with a solution. Also remember that just because someone complains about something, it doesn't mean that you can complain about the same thing in the same way. Poles very often complain about everything that is Polish, but if you, as a foreigner, start complaining about Poland, about Polishness, about the Polish language, they may feel very offended. Coming back to taking off shoes inside the house, remember that you do not have to take off your shoes in public places such as churches, offices and universities unless there are some activities taking place that require it, or you are in the spa or swimming pool that requires it. If you want to smoke, ask the host where you can do it, because smoking indoors is no longer popular and more Poles do not smoke indoors, even if they are heavy smokers. If you are curious about what the house looks like in Poland, remember that visiting the house on your own or looking into the nooks and crannies of the house is considered inappropriate in Poland. So unless your host has given you permission to wander around the house, you should only be there where the rest of the guests are. Looking into closed rooms or closed drawers or cabinets on your own is considered extremely impolite. If the host you are staying with has children or pets, remember to treat them with respect and do not chase them away, because both children and animals are very important in Polish culture. In the youngest generations, animals are sometimes even treated as children. If you already sit down at the table, remember that eating with your hands is possible only in the case of pizza, sandwiches, or chicken or duck legs or wings. Cutlery is used every other time, and there is no hand that is clean or unclean, so both hands are treated exactly the same way at the table. It is also impolite to use your fingernails at the table to pick your teeth or to sprinkle spices on your meal. You can pick your teeth with a toothpick. Remember that Polish cuisine contains a lot of garlic, onions, salt, and pork. In fact, almost in every main meal. If you want vegan or halal food, you have to tell the host about it, but he or she will not always be able to accommodate you with vegan or halal food within a few minutes. Formal dinner consists of soup, which is usually very, very hot, second course, usually with meat, with pork, and the dessert, usually accompanied by coffee. And the general rules for eating meals. Everybody eats together at the same time, regardless of gender and age. You can talk while eating as long as you don't spit out food. Poles use both hands when eating and both hands to serve food or drink. You can wipe your hands with a tissue. Don't cough. Don't blow your nose at the table. It is considered rude, although it sometimes happens. Putting your phone on the table is considered rude, although it happens in younger generations, and talking on the phone while sitting with others for a meal is considered rude. You should get up and talk somewhere else. The most popular Polish traditional food is bigos, something like hunter stew, which contains pork. There are also a lot of pickled vegetables like cucumbers, mushrooms, and peppers, but it is not pickled like in the West in the vinegar. The vegetables are put in the salt water until they are soft. They will not hurt you, but try to eat small portions at the beginning, because at the start of your Polish journey, your digestive system has get to used to it. Pierogis are also very popular. This is a form of dumplings made of white flour that has different fillings, for example, strawberries, cherries, cheese with potatoes, cheese with spinach, or spinach alone. All kinds of dumplings are also popular, which are not pierogis, they are different. They are usually round, quite heavy, and mostly contain meat, usually pork. In addition, there are also soups. Poles are very proud of their soups. There are different soups in every region. Very often, these soups contain cream from cow's milk. So if you are allergic to lactose, remember to always ask in the case of soups and salads with such a white coating whether they contain cream, because it may be dangerous for you. Remember to sit in places intended for this purpose, on chairs, on sofas, on armchairs, because sitting on the back of chairs or sitting on the floor may be considered rare in case of sitting on the floor and uncultured in case of sitting on the back of the chair. Generally, it is better not to put your feet on any furniture unless you see the host doing it, or until you have been given permission to do so. When it comes to alcohol, the younger part of the population drink less alcohol than older generations, but in general, Poles are heavy drinkers. Be aware of this if you don't want to drink alcohol. It's okay. You can refuse politely, especially if your religion does not allow drinking alcohol. Then inform the person who is trying to persuade you to drink, and he or she will most likely stop pressuring you. Unfortunately, Polish culture is a culture of forcing to drink alcohol. So if you have no real reason not to drink, other than lack of willingness to drink, use just like Poles, fake excuses, like I can't drink alcohol because I take medications, and mixing alcohol with medications could end badly for me. Poles do it all the time. And now a bit about a little taboo. The toilet. Most Polish toilets do not have shower heads attached to the toilet. Poles use only toilet paper, sometimes wet toilet wipes, and they only wash their hands after leaving the toilet. There is also a war going on about the seat of the toilet. So the war is about if the toilet seat should be raised or closed. It is the best to follow the rule that is already available to you. If the seat was raised, leave it up. If the seat was closed, after taking care of your needs, close the seat. And moving on to more official business behavior. When it comes to business cards should be written in the local language, in this case in Polish language, or in the local language and English, or in your language and English. Poles most often give a business card with their left hand, while they give you a handshake with their right hand. And they only look briefly at the business card, but they can sometimes write something on it, particularly important information about you. For example, when you meet, what do you do? And in this situation, they do not pay attention to the color of the ink. It's just the color of the pen, so it doesn't mean that, for example, they wish you some harm. It happens that Poles do not hide business cards in the wallet intended for this purpose, but, for example, in their shirt pocket or even trouser pocket. And they do not think that this is impolite. They absolutely do not think that this is ridiculing or degrading. There is also a funny thing about universities. Many important people at the university do not have a business card. Don't worry if you don't have business card. Most often the exchange of business information involves exchanging a phone number or giving you a website address. Business cards are not so important like in UK or USA. Now let's move on to phones and taking photos. It is very impolite if you take a photo of someone without their consent. Of course, if you are taking a photo of a crowd, you do not have to ask for permission. But if you are taking a photo of one specific person, especially in closed spaces, you must have this consent. In some places, especially tourist one, you also have to be careful with people who earn money by posing to photos. It may turn out that a man dressed as a teddy bear on walking route may demand money from you for allowing himself to be taken a photo. In public places, you shouldn't talk loudly on the phone. You rather lower your voice or go outside to the corridor or to the bus stop. Talking loudly is considered impolite, and watching reels in public places with your voice on is extremely rude. If you want to watch Netflix, for example, you should have headphones in public spaces. Also remember that in many trains there are special compartments marked as a silence zone, in Polish strefa ciszy. In this zone you cannot make any sounds even with headphones. You should listen quietly so that the person sitting next to you does not hear the sound from your headphones. You also cannot talk, especially on the phone. And when it comes to train and buses, it is important to remember that it is rather impolite to eat on the train or bus, especially meals that rustle, crackle in the teeth, or have a strong smell. There are special compartments designed for this purpose. And now, a moment about bad words. Poles are generally rather proud of their swear words, even if they do not swear. Many Poles swear very strongly, even in some official situations, but it is not considered cultured. Remember also that you, as a person for whom Polish is not the first language, you are unlikely to feel the weight of the curse. So it is better not to swear in a foreign language because you may use too strong expressions. And now, intercultural communication and cooperation presented on Erin Mayer's cultural map. The map contains 8 sub-points that makes it much easier to adapt if you are outside of your own country. The first point is communication, and as you can see, Poland is halfway between high context and low context. Countries with low context, including the United States, Netherlands, Finland, Denmark, UK, are countries where it is much more common to say exactly what you want to openly say. If something is not said directly, it basically does not exist. In these countries, especially in the USA, the listener is not required to guess or search for the meaning that will be hidden in the words. And the countries to the right of Poland, like Brazil, France, India, Kenya, South Korea, Indonesia, Japan, Singapore, Italy, Spain, or Mexico, there is high context in communication. It means that many things will not be said directly because it will be considered uncultured. It will violate a certain taboo. Therefore, many things should be guessed. The listener is expected to draw from the context what he or she needs, and if he or she doesn't know something, they will find out discreetly about asking some discreet questions. Because a direct question will make us have to answer directly, and this may be perceived as a rude pressure. Poland is in the middle of the scale, which means that not everything will be said directly, that you have to guess many things. But since it is very difficult to guess what are the cultural rules or rules of behavior in other culture, it is worth going down to an even lower context in such situation and ask directly your questions. You will be forgiven because you are a foreigner and because you have the right not to know everything. The Polish Z generation, so people born in Poland after 1995, are much lower in context, which means that they are much more likely to pay attention to the fact that they were not informed about something, that they did not know something. Among students, it is normal that the student does not know something and that he or she can ask questions. In older generation, it was and still is seen as inability to obtain information, but not in the case of foreigners who have no other way to obtain information. So don't worry and ask openly. The second on the scale is providing feedback. And here, the position of the United States may be surprising as it jumps from the most open countries in terms of communication with the lowest context to the middle of the scale. This is, of course, due to cultural habits, and in case of the United States, you can provide direct information, so provide data. But providing opinion and evaluation should be more delicate. Meanwhile, Poland is changing with the United States on this scale. Poland is one of those countries where negative feedback is given very directly. If a Pole gave you negative feedback very directly, speaking without beating around the bush, it doesn't mean that he or she doesn't like you. It means that he or she informed you about what he doesn't like in a way that is consistent with his culture. For many people from other countries, Polish feedback is incredibly uncultured, invasive, aggressive, and is perceived as offensive. In the generation of lecturers, it is very common to provide feedback that is based on negative associations. And although this is something that is being fought against in Polish culture, there is still a long way ahead of Poles. It is also worth noting that the younger the generation, the milder the feedback it provides. So if we divided Poles into generations, the oldest generations of Poles would actually be on the solid left of the scale, but the youngest generations, X and Zs, would be much more close to Spain, France, Sweden, or even Italy. Next on the list is persuading, and as you can see, Poland is between Russia and Germany when it comes to persuading, and therefore Poland loves documents. In the case of Poland, in order to implement any idea, first, everything takes very long time. Then you need to check tenfolds with subsequent superiors to adapt the documents to it. Create a whole ton of new documents, regulations, instructions, and only then you can move on to implementing the idea. The opposite is true in such countries like Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, UK, or the United States, where very often you first test an idea in life, and only then, if it succeeds, you create documents. And that's why Poles love documents. So if you're impatient, you're discouraged by Polish administration, Polish bureaucracy, then know that this stems from the subsection, not the official's malice or the fact that the lady in the dean's office doesn't like you. Unfortunately, any attempts to speed up the administration are usually doomed to failure because Poles are very afraid of breaking the norms and rules regarding administrative process. So you probably have no way of getting something done for you faster and outside the official administrative path. This also means that even grants from the European Union, which, for example, in the Netherlands, are settled very quickly, very efficiently, and with a minimum number of documents, in Poland will be associated with dozens of documents and dozens of additional activities that do not exist in the Netherlands. Any attempts to put pressure on administration employees ends in frustration for these employees, and they may actually stop liking you because in their opinion they are unable to do anything to speed up administrative activities, and your actions, in this case your pressure, is perceived as personal attack on this person. When it comes to leading, as you can see, Poland is at the level of Peru and Russia, and therefore Poland is a relatively hierarchical country. In fact, it means that the title is still very important, the rank is very important. If you violate the chain of command, the chain of authority, you will be perceived as extremely rude. This means that if you have a superior at the university, you cannot bypass your superior and go to a higher superior with your problem or ideas, because your direct superior might take revenge on you for omitting him in the information chain. This is perceived not only as a lack of respect, but also as undermining the position of the superior. In many countries, leading does not connect with deciding, decision-making process. For example, Japan is extremely hierarchical, but in case of decision-making, consensus is important. Group consent is important. Poland remains more or less in the same place as this was in the case of leading, and is located between Italy and Russia. This means that not only it is hierarchical country, but also is the country where decisions are made by people who are higher in the hierarchy. And people who are lower in the hierarchy can only suggest their own proposals, but cannot try to force them because it is treated as stepping out of the line and as undermining decisions of their superiors. The next issue is trusting. And this is an interesting issue because in the case of Poland, which is more or less in the middle between cultures that are task-based and cultures based on relationships, Poland seems to be relatively strong relational. In task-oriented cultures, trust is built by showing our actions and showing what is the result of our work. In a relationship-based culture, we trust each other because we know each other, not because we know each other's work. And both issues are important in Poland. This is, first of all, showing that you can work effective, but like in many relational countries, even if you are the best in your field, but you don't have so-called back, plecy. That is, if you don't have any connections, social connections, you are not able to reach a certain level. At some point, you immediately hit the glass ceiling, beyond which you cannot go, which is why it is so important to maintain positive relationships with people who can help you in your professional career. Unlike countries that are based mainly on relationships and which are therefore very often prone to corruption or paternalistic processes, in Poland corruption is prohibited. So if it occurs to you to give someone a particularly valuable gift, think twice because you could end up in jail. In Poland, professional relationships are rather built through contact, by remembering someone's birthday and what is happening in their life, but also by making each other's career easier. So, if you come from a country where relationships are more important than in Poland, Poles may seem to you too neutral, too indifferent. They may seem uninterested in your life because they simply cannot establish relationships in the same way as it happens in India, Russia, or Thailand. People who have been working together in Poland often for 10 years know almost nothing about each other's lives, have never been to each other's home, even though they get along perfectly professionally and recommend each other to further employers. Going out for a beer or dinner together, going on the trips together or visiting each other's home and knowing each other's children is not necessary to establish a good professional relationship in Poland. Unfortunately, this means a certain loneliness, because if you come from a country where relationships are basis, Poland may seem to you a very cold country, hard to establish private, non-professional relationships in the workplace. Polish friendships usually take 2-3 years to warm up, and Poles most often have only 1 or 2 friends throughout their lives. And further colleagues with whom they actually go out or go on holiday have maybe about 20, which is a very small number in comparison with many collectivist countries. And for this reason, many foreigners from collectivist cultures close themselves in the environments of migrants. But it is not safe from the point of view of building relationships with Poles. It is worth taking care of relationships with Poles, even if they warm up slowly. After a few years, it will result in successful relationships. And the last 2 points from Erin Meyer's cultural map. The first one is disagreeing, and as you can see, Poles are on the left side of the scale, at the same level as Germany, Russia, and Netherlands, and therefore Poles are very confrontative. While in many cultures that avoid confrontation, you avoid saying no, and avoiding saying that something is impossible or that I can't do it for you, in Polish culture it is absolutely permissible. If it turns out that you are asking me for something that is for me impossible, I can say it to your face, and very often I won't explain why I don't want to help you, because I think I have the right to do so. For cultures that avoid confrontation, it's like a slap in the face. But in this situation, it is worth remembering that Poles adhere to the principle that it is better to tell even an unpleasant truth than to lie. Many cultures do, for example, saying, I will check this, or I will see what can be done, in a place of no. And they assume that everyone knows that this is no, only given in a cultural way. For Poles, it's perceived as lying, cheating, insincerity, and they very often lose trust in a person who can say no directly. It is also very difficult for Poles to understand this information hidden in a deep context. So they are really convinced that you are working on it, that you are really still looking for a solution, and that they can trust you that the situation will be resolved. And when that doesn't happen, they start to see you as a wordless person who can't get the job done. The last point on Erin Meyer's map is scheduling. It refers to linear time and flexible time. Generally, countries such as Sweden, Switzerland, Germany, and Japan are countries of linear time. Rather, time is money. Time can be counted. If we want to do something, we should do it at one time. One thing at one time. If we do many things at one time, it means that we are not doing it properly. In turn, countries such as Brazil, China, Turkey, Nigeria, Russia, and Italy use flexible time much more often. In those cultures, being late is not perceived as extreme crime. You can be late unless it is a plane. In any other case, this is not that important. And if you are nervous, if someone is late by these 3 minutes, by these 10 minutes, it means that this is your problem, because you can't cope with it. You are not mature enough to wait. In flexible time cultures, it is very often allowed to do many things at the same time, and it is not received as doing something inaccurate. In some flexible cultures, it is believed that time for each person is different, and therefore you cannot compare the time of different people. And for example, in some cultures, it is believed that if you do nothing, you can't waste time because you haven't created time. So if you haven't created time by doing something, you're not wasting it because it doesn't exist. What a fantastic idea. Many time-sensitive people could definitely use such relaxation. In relation to life in Poland, this means that while in a private meeting you can be late by a few minutes or even more, in professional life, time is perceived more in a Western style, and this means that being late for a meeting, also online meeting, is perceived as very serious offense. And also, if you have a deadline, this deadline cannot be exceeded, and at the university, missing deadlines is unacceptable, which means that you cannot ask, for example, your favorite lady from the dean's office to extend your deadline unless you have extremely close relationship. But in most cases, a deadline is a deadline and you cannot change this. No crying, no complaints, no candy will help in this situation. Even if the lady or gentleman from dean's office is willing to help you, he or she is not able to do this. Thanks to Erin Meyer's cultural map, we already know what behaviors are recommended and what behaviors are not recommended in Polish cultural environment. And now it is worth taking a closer look at nonverbal communication, because Erin Meyer's cultural map does not mention it. First of all, it should be remembered that not only verbal communication complements verbal communication, but it also extends it, often with signs that are contradictory to what is being said. As I have already mentioned, the Polish national sport is complaining, but Poles also have a very specific sense of humor. Slightly dark, gallow humor, and often it is expressed through gestures. That is, one thing is said, but if the gestures are completely contrary to what is spoken, most likely you should pay attention to what is shown and not what is said. Let's start from the end with proxemics. When it comes to the permissible distance during conversation in Poland, most often between people at the university, so people with whom you are not closely emotionally connected, it will be at least at the distance of an outstretched arm. The entire outstretched arm, not an elbow. No closer, no farther. If you stand farther away during the conversation, not the lecture for instance, it means that you don't want to talk to this person. If you stand closer, it means that he or she is probably imposing too much closeness on us, and maybe he or she is interested in a sexual way. I have already mentioned time in the cultural map of Erin Meyer, but self-presentation is also important. It is especially important in the case of universities and universities' employees and students to look a certain way. Poland is still a relatively high hierarchical country, and unless you have a strong need to show your tattoos, piercing, and your individual style, it is better if you dress modestly. And I know that dressing modestly in different cultures may look different. In the case of Poland, this means for women, skirts or dresses no shorter than hand length above the knee, and necklines that do not show the gap between the breasts. For men, this means no short and no unbuttoned shirt that would show chest hair. When it comes to shoes, it is increasingly allowed to wear sport shoes. However, in the case of men, it is recommended that the footwear be of uniform dark color without additional decorations. In the case of women, it is recommended that shoes, especially summer ones, do not show the toenails and heel, although more and more often in hot summer periods, it is not a rule anymore. So when it comes to clothing, it is worth looking around your department of the university and seeing how other lecturers, other university employees, or other senior students dress and adapt to this style of dress. When it comes to paralanguage, it is worth remembering that in Poland people don't speak very animatedly in a loud, raised voice, and they don't gesticulate very clearly and profusely. Going to the kinesthetic subsection, which means body language, facial expressions, and many others. Poles have relatively rich facial expressions, especially compared to people in Southeast Asia, but much poorer than some cultures such as Italian culture, Arabic cultures, or Indian cultures. Therefore, it may happen that Polish facial expressions won't be easy to recognize for foreigners. It's the same with gestures, and in a moment I will show you some gestures characteristic to Polish culture that may have a different meaning in your culture. I hope that not all the gestures were incomprehensible to you, or that it will now be much easier for you to communicate with your colleagues at the university. And as a summary, it is worth focusing on one issue that is very important for immigrants who come to any country. Therefore, it is worth taking a closer look at cultural shock. Kalervo-Oberg stated that culture shock is how people react to strange or unfamiliar places, culture, customs, and culture shock is a feeling of disorientation that appears when someone immerses themselves in a foreign culture, in a foreign lifestyles, and in foreign sets of attitudes. But it is worth remembering one more thing here. Culture shock is a reaction that is a normal process, and it simply happens in a foreign environment. Therefore, culture shock can happen even when you move to another city, and even more so can happen when you move to another country. Not everyone, of course, will be prone to culture shock, especially if the culture of the host country is similar to the culture of your own country. Although the similarity of cultures can also be a trap, because we assume if we came from Ukraine, for example, that Polish culture is exactly the same, only with different language or slightly different religion. Meanwhile, cultural differences between Poland and Ukraine do exist, and they are visible, for example, on Erin Mayer's culture map. What's more, culture shock can have significant consequences for people who experience it, and more about these consequences in a moment. Some of the symptoms of culture shock include feeling homesick, feeling helpless, isolated, disoriented, we lack concentration, we are prone to irritability, sadness, sleep problems, sometimes even paranoia, and we can see symptoms that are characteristic for long-term stress, even physical symptoms. As you can see in this chart, culture shock begins before leaving our own country, that is, we have mood swings, which usually, if we want to leave the country, of course, we are not forced to this, for example, by the war. So after arriving to the new country, we have so-called honeymoon, and in this moment, we like almost everything. Everything is nice, super exciting, everything smells funny and intriguing. And this happens until we encounter the first serious problem that we cannot solve in a way that we know from our own culture. When we come across the first problem that we cannot solve, our mood usually lowers. We start to get stressed, we start to become outraged by the situation, that we cannot find our way, and no one is going to help us. And at this point, it slides towards culture shock, and there are three options. We reach for help or look for help, and we manage to move upwards towards stabilization. Or we decide to leave because we decide that this country is absolutely not suitable for us. Or we are stuck in. So we neither integrating nor deciding to leave, and we are starting to live in suspension. In such situation, it is again best to seek support, not only from your friends, but also to seek support from the university and local centers for migrants. Sometimes a visit to a therapist or psychologist who is particularly familiar with issues related to culture shock can be very helpful. And if you think that once you achieve stabilization it will last forever, you couldn't be more wrong. Stabilization also has its ups and downs. It may show up again because you have encountered another new phenomenon which will lower your mood again, but if you can seek help and find answers to your questions, you will return to a level of stability again. So now let's talk about conditions which we need to reduce culture shock. First of all, we must remember that in order to reduce culture shock, we must be open and curious. Without this, there is no chance of reducing culture shock. And what's more, it would be good to learn at least a little of the local language because language is the carrier of culture. It is also worth maintaining contacts with the local population. It is even better to find not only external help in the form of support in a center for migrants, but also to actually build friendly relationship with selected people from the local culture who can be our cultural translators. And the last but not least important issue is the recognition that dealing with culture shock is a long-term process and that it cannot be done in a fraction of a second or in a few days or even a few weeks. We have to give ourselves permission for a certain weakness, certain confusion in the head and uncomfortable emotions. And remember that at the beginning of your stay in the foreign country, you agree to certain things that you are not comfortable with after a few months, after a few weeks. And eventually they start to bother you after some time. And you have the right to renegotiate your relationships. You have the right to renegotiate your terms of accommodation or methods of treatment to which you agree. Listen to your body. Listen to your heart. Listen to your emotions. Listen to your brain, because all of them are showing you at what point you cross the line beyond which not only culture shock begins, but also emotional problems that may result in depression. Locking yourself at home and trying to figure out the local culture on your own is almost always doomed to failure. Without test subjects on which you can test how much you have learned the new culture, you have no way of checking whether you have already adapted to the local conditions or not yet. So remember to be open-minded and to learn about the country's culture. Try not to get lost in sad thoughts at home. Perhaps write your journal to record your experiences, including the positive aspects of the new culture. Be active and make friends within local culture, even if it is difficult for you. And be honest about your own emotions, about your own loss. And if you are already lost, ask for help or advice and talk to your university friends from Poland, because communication always works both ways. So, to summarize what to do and what not to do in intercultural communication, we have to remember that basic principles are to focus on the proper transfer of information and active listening. Try to praise more often and criticize less, and do not run away from conflicts. Try to solve them. Engage in appreciation for diversity and avoid negativity in communication. Give your support to positive actions and treat others with empathy, but don't forget about assertiveness. You will need this assertiveness in Poland. So in summary, I have given you basic information about Poland, about Polish culture, intercultural communication in Poland, and cooperation with Poles. In such a short time, it is not possible to provide details about culture, but there is a lot of information about Polish culture in the internet, especially since there are more and more foreigners in Poland who perceive Polish culture from outside and who can help you find your way in Polish culture. Take care of yourself. Don't exceed your limits. Cherish yourself. Take care and support others on this journey. If you have any questions, you can contact Dean's Office of University of Lodz. People working there will be happy to help you. However, if you still have questions about Polish culture, you can find me on Facebook or LinkedIn and ask me about it. Thank you for your attention, and I keep my fingers crossed for you.